Everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and we're all here now, hopefully, for the part 2 video in making the next in our Lilly Rose Dolls characters, which is the Highland Cow. Now, the kit that I'm working on is Byron, who is the 16-inch male Highland Cow, but this same process and the same steps are used to create this generic doll, if you like, and that is for Emma and for Kristof as well. So it's the size. Kristof is 14 inches and Byron and Emma are 16 inches. And then the difference between Byron and Emma is just the clothes. So you can use the same video, is what I'm trying to say, for all three of those characters in order to make your own. I want to say a big thank you as well to Lilly Rose Dolls, Claire and Richard, for gifting the kit for me so that I can bring this video to you, Sewalong video to you. So full disclosure. I know most of you will have seen the finished Byron or Highland Cow in the video for part 1, but I just thought I'd just do a quick show for those who are jumping straight into part 2 to see what you're actually going to be making, and just to make sure that you're happy with the finish and that you'll be happy that your Highland Cow looks the same as mine does here, complete with tail. Okay, so in the part 1 video we talked about working with our faux fur and how to cut that out. We spoke about how to cut out all of the pattern pieces together and the felt pieces together. This is just a quick recap in case people are jumping into part 2 without having seen part 1, just covering over some of the things we've done, so just bear with me. And we've cut out all of the pieces so that we made sure that we've got enough felt in the kit for making everything before we even took one snip into that felt. We've then went on and made our little tail, and I attached that into that part 1 video as well. So if you want to know how to do the tail, then that's in the part 1 video just at the end. And then off camera, I've then gone and made my body and my 2 legs and my 2 arms. So I've stuck true to what I try to do, which is that once I've got the head made, I want a body to stick it straight on, or to sew it straight onto. And therefore, by just taking my time to just complete these steps and get used to working with the felt and with stuff in the character, those are now all ready for me to go. So we can work on the head, and then I'll be able to then pop it all together, and then we'll be able to have a look at the finished product and finished character. So let me get the camera tilted down and we'll get started. The first thing that I'm going to be sewing, as I said, I like to try and do I called them appendages, didn't I? But I mean my extra bits really. So I'm going to do my horns and my ears first, so that they're just to one side and finished. But and then I'll move on to the main head. So what I've taken is my piece of felt. Now what I tend to find is that when you are sewing some small things like this with lots of curves in them, you're actually better to keep them drawn out onto your felt, but then keep the felt as one whole piece and cut them out afterwards. So let me show how I do that. So I did put the pattern pieces on and drew around them, and then I've got a pin in the middle of each one. That's just so that the felt can't twist on me while I'm sewing and then compromise that. But because we've got 1/4 inch seam allowance on these horns, I mean I could have drawn them and just had them without, but what we need to do now is have the edge of our presser foot up against that drawn line, and then with the needle slightly in from there, that will then give us our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So to do this, I move my needle. So at the moment, my needle will go from a 0 to a 3, so which is all the way to the left, to a 7, which is all the way to the right. And generally on a normal stitch, it'll stitch in the middle at a 3.5. But if you move your needle across to the right, using whichever button you need to do, then if I take my seam gauge, which is this one here, and I rest my finger against the seam gauge, I can then check to make sure that at the edge of the presser foot is my mark 0, and that my needle is going to go in at the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that way then, so long as I keep an eye on the edge of my presser foot here, so I'm going to run the presser foot here along the edge of the drawn line. So we're going to be going around like that. Then it means that I don't have to try and guess that seam allowance all the time, because so long as that I don't move my needle while I'm sewing, and I've got my needle now so that it's into position 0, which is right over to the right, which is just here, then the distance from there to there is my 1/4 inch. So that, by learning to move your needle when you're sewing, can help you get more accurate lines. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to leave this long the short edge open, and we've got the roundness of the horns here. So that bit there is going to stay open. So I'm going to line my presser foot up here. And then I've got my needle, as I say, in position number 7 on it. So I can take a few stitches forward, a few stitches back. And then I'm going to put my needle in the work, which means that then we can do the pivoting, which is when we lift up the presser foot with our needle in, and this piece of felt then is anchored down so that it's not going to move for us. So now I'm just going to stop my sewing, and I'm making sure that where I am across from my needle, that's the part that we need to be aware of, is directly on that drawn line that we've got for our horns, because we want both horns to be the same size, and that is how we achieve that. So once we come to a curve, leave needle in the work and then just change your direction slightly, and you'll be able to start and do a bit more. I get my awl, so this is an awl, which is just for pointing and just for helping to hold the fabric down. Take it slowly on these curves. So we're coming up to the end of the horn here, so let's just see how we get on with that. It's going to be quite tight. I'm going to take some stitches forward to about 1/4 inch from the end, and then I'm just going to do 1 stitch at a time as I change direction on the end of the horn, before then straightening up to come back round the other side. And again, I'm following my drawn line with the edge of my presser foot, and then when I need to, I can just change direction. And that's how you get a lovely smooth line on your curved edges. Then we're going to do just a couple of stitches back on the end, and then I'm going to sew up to top here to reposition myself ready for my next one. So a couple more stitches. Right, so I'm positioned again now, so let's go down onto this next one. Once I go in within my drawn line, I'm going to reverse a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to carry on. So my machine has got a function whereby when I stop sewing, my needle is always in my work. If you've not got that function, you will need to use, get the camera around, you will need to use your hand crank button on here, which you could use to move the needle, and you can use that and always just get used to when you're wanting to pivot, just getting that needle down into your fabric, and then it'll anchor it for you whilst you're changing direction. Take that second pin out now. But hopefully you can see that working on this bigger piece of felt is easier than it would have been if we'd have been trying to sew these individually under the presser foot. It's not impossible, you can do it, but it's just trying to take some of the headache out of it for you. Let's come back down to the end of this horn again. We'll start to get close to the end, and we'll start and do those single stitches and start and change direction. So we get a nice curved edge on the end of the horn. I did 2 stitches there instead of 1, so let's just go back down here now. Try not to do bigger change of direction in one go. You're better off to do more changes of direction. That will make it smoother for you. And reverse at the end again. Needle up and take our threads off, and I can show you how this looks. Now you can see the curved edge of the horn and those nice smooth tops to them. Hopefully this one's got a little bit of an angle on, but I don't think you're going to notice once we turn it through. But you can see I'm 1/4 inch in from the edge of those. But then what I'm going to take then is my pinking shears, which is the ones with the triangular blades that we've spoken about and used before, and I am going to now cut out these horns on the drawn edge, not the sewn edge, the drawn edge, and that will just help reduce some of the bulk in the edges. The triangles on the scissors helps reduce the bulk when we turn these round. So there's one horn. Let's do the other one. look too close to my stitches then. There we go. So there's our 2 horns there ready for stitching on. So the felt that I've got spare will go into my stash, or the bits that I can use again. The rest of the bits, let me just tidy that up. The thing that we're going to do now is we're going to pull these sides of these horns apart, and we're going to turn them round. So I'm going down to where the curve is in the horn first, and I've pulled the 2 sides of the horn apart, and I'm trying to tuck the bottom part of the horn inside the rest of it. We can pull it through later on, and if you've got a turning tool, then that's a good way of turning these. Don't use the point of your awl, but the handle of the awl is also something good that we can use just to help move this felt down over the end where it comes out. Make sure you've got a protective board on the bottom of your mat, so you're not pulling out onto your table. And then you're going to use have you got a pin here, or we can use the end of the awl again and just try and push out the end of the horn. You're trying not to stretch the felt though, so just be aware of how much pressure you're using, because you don't want to be stretching your horn out of shape. So just ease, you can see where the stitches are for your seam, and you'll be able to see when you get to the end of it. And just having those triangles cut into it will just help turn it. The end's going to be quite bulky, but we want it's going to be stuffed anyway. So we just need that just to come out to give us that full shape the way around. Okay, so there's a nice looking horn. Just roll your stitches out so your seam's right on the edge. And then once we've done that, I'll get some felt so that we can, some stuffing so that we can just put some stuffing inside that. Okay, so just with a little bit of stuffing, you're best off with a little bit at a time when you're doing these. You're just going to poke it in the end. You can use the end of not the pointy end, the other end of a knitting needle to do this, or a crochet hook sometimes can be quite useful as well. They have quite good handles on them if you've got those in your storeroom. This is a little Perspex add 1/4 inch seam tool that I got free with a magazine, but it's got the blunt end. It's quite good for just stuffing these smaller pieces, and I use it for the arms and the legs as well, just to get everything in. And then we're just going to stuff this gently right down to that end. Perhaps use the end of that as well, just to get that right in. Move it down to the end, then a little bit more. Sometimes making like a loop with your finger and your fingers, and then holding the horn in the middle. So if you do it like that, so hold the horn in your hand, and then it just helps to be able sometimes to support it whilst you're getting the stuffing inside. So just continue until they're ready. And it does say in the instructions to oversew the ends, but I'm going to hold off oversewing my ends, the short end here, just until I finish the head, because if we want to make the horns any smaller or bigger by adding a bit more stuffing into it, then we can do at that stage. And I think that at the moment I just want to get them kind of mostly made, and then we can then finish them off just as we use them. And there we have a very nice curvy shaped horn for our character. So I'm going to do exactly the same with the other one, which you don't need to see on camera because you've seen me do it once, and I'll come back to you then when we're on to the ears. So once you've got your 2 horns stuffed and together, just make sure that you put one on top of the other, just to make sure they're the same length and the same width. They should be if you followed your seam allowance, but it'll just make sure you've not stuffed one more than the other, and so that they're looking as even as possible. Then we'll just pop those to one side with the rest of the stuff that we've got ready. The next thing then we're going to work on is the ears, and you should have 2 pairs of ears like this, 2 pairs of piece of fabric. And then all we're going to do is, let's just move that pin just down the very centre, because that will make it easier for us to sew. we're going to leave this long straight edge open, and then these two curved sides here we're going to sew. So with these, I've still got my needle at position number 7, and I'm using the edge of my presser foot for my guide for how much, and I've taken a few stitches forward and a few stitches back, and then I put my needle in the work because we will need to curve round this edge here. So we're going to follow the edge of the fabric, which will give us that lovely shape that we need. If we start to try and cut off any corners, then we're going to end up with very straight and rectangle looking ears. So try and stick to your shape as much as possible. When we get to about 1/4 inch from the end, we're going to stop, swivel our fabric round, and then we're going to then sew down the other side. Got a bit more of a curve at the bottom here, so just make sure you keep to the edges for that, and then reverse at the end again. And then we'll do something called chain piecing, which is when you don't take the fabric out, but you'll put your next piece of fabric in and just butt it up to the other one. Do a few stitches to start there, and then you can then start to take your ear around up to the top just here. So let's get that 1/4 inch again, and once you twist it around like that, you can just snip off your extra ear or just leave it going to the edge, it doesn't matter, just saves a bit of joining thread, that's all. Make sure we keep that curvy edge. I'm going to reverse at the end. Out. And then we've got our two lovely ears like this. So then I'm going to take out the pins. And because we've got a curved edge again, I'm going to use my pinking shears. And the one thing I didn't say is if you haven't got pinking shears, don't panic, you can still do this. So with the pinking shears, we're either going to go around the edge like this. At the very top and the points, just go straight across your point to take off the fabric there, and perhaps even just a little bit further than 180 degrees across, just take that bulk out. But then if you've not got pinking shears, you can use your scissors. Just use the very points and just take out some little triangles along this edge. And you're just taking out some little triangles like this up to but not through your stitches. You can see why the pinking shears are a little quicker for curves. And I do use mine quite a lot, so they're a great Christmas present or birthday present to have, or a just because present. So you cut out your triangles like that. So that does the same effect when you turn this inside, because that edge is longer than it will be when it's turned inside. It'll make this curve sit nice and easily. I'm just going to use my pinking shears just for speed. Let's do them on both of those. I'll do the sides first, and I'll come back and just take off that top edge just there, and just take off the points of the triangles either side, and that should give us a nice edge to turn around. And again, we're going to just pull the sides away from the edge, tuck the bottom in, and then we can start and push that through. I do find that's an easier way of turning things round with less stretching on the felt than if you try and sort of pull it open here and then sort of try and reach in to get everything. So if you pull the sides apart first, you then don't put so much pressure on that edge. Use the point of my awl just to pull out the edges, or you can use a pin. Get right into the very point of that ear, and then we're just going to roll the fabric in our hands just so that seams on the edge, just like that. Make sure the end of your ear is right out without making a hole in your felt. There we go, because that's going to look nice. And that's what we're looking for. So again, on this one, pull apart the sides first, and then just tuck the point in, and then that gives you an indentation, and then you can pull your felt down over it. As I say, it just releases the pressure on that other edge. Right, so let's get these two. I don't think these are stuffed. I think these are just now left as they are, and we'll come back to those in a minute, but at least we've got them sewn and prepped and ready. Just roll those edges, make sure those edges come out, all looking all lovely. And also just put one ear over the top of the other. Oops, let's go that way. And just make sure that they're the same size as well. And they are, so I've got a bit more of a curve. Right, so I can see on mine that for some reason here I've got a bit more of a curve. So what I'm going to do with that one, remembering which side it is that I want to alter, let me just turn it back the other way. Sometimes it's just about knowing how to make things right. So I've still got hold of the curve that is a bit too pointy. So I'm just going to put that back in my machine again. Start a few stitches in and a few stitches back, and then I'm just going to take off some of that curve and then reverse my stitches again. Oops. So you can see my second row of stitching just inside the first, and then now I'm going to turn this one round again. Pull the sides apart. Because you want the characters to be even if possible. I mean, obviously not everybody's perfect, and that's absolutely fine, but if you like the symmetrical look, then you just need to just reference one against the other. And if not, then they're perfectly imperfect, aren't they? Or perfectly perfect, depending on how you want to look at it. So that's that second ear now. So let's put those back together again, and I can see that those now match perfectly, the curves match nicely. So I'm happy with those. So they can go to one side as well with the rest of it. So let me just get my other pieces together and we'll get started on the rest of the head. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces of head here, and well, 3 pieces with the gusset as well, and I've got my fabric here. So I'm just going to see which side we want this to be. Okay, so I'm going to have mine with my markings on the outside. So we put this together so that the 2 noses points are together, so we know we've got a left and a right, and just make sure that everything's all okay on the felt, because this is going to be the face and going to be seen. The thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this long head gusset, and at one end you've got a straight edge and at the other end you've got a curvy edge. The side with the curvy edge, let's take that together, let's fold this in half perfectly so that it's all sitting on top of each other, and I want to make a little notch where that folded line is. So remember, we make those notches in fabrics just to note where we are. So put a little snip in, it's just a couple of millimetres, and it's just on the edge of that fabric, and that's just going to mark that halfway point for us so that I know where that is. Okay, so just had a quick look at the instructions again, because I know that in the instructions you are to now match up the back of the head. So you'd find the back neck edge here, this straight edge, and the straight edge on the felt, and you match that up and tack that, or pin it first, and then tack that in place along the nose and along the curve. But because you've got what's called a Y seam in quilting terms, you've got these, this is how this head gusset goes, that's going to go in the middle there, and then it curves round, and it's this combination of curves that makes the shape of the face. I'm going to try and explain something a little bit different for you, and hopefully it's going to be easier, because what we're going to do this neck seam first before we add the head gusset. Now this is going to work on this character because we've got quite a wide nose seam here and head gusset, but if we've got a much smaller gusset we might not be able to do it, so just bear that in mind. For these characters though, you should be fine. So what we're going to do is take our felt pieces and we're going to put them right sides together. We're going to match the nose point, and we're going to match this little sort of noggin out that is for the neck seam, and put as many pins along here as you need to feel comfortable. Those 3 should do for me. And we're going to start at this nose point, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch down here and around the neck here, and then keep that spacing down the end of the neck there. So let's start here. So at the end, match your fabric up, few stitches forward, few stitches back, and then needle in the work just so that we can take our pins out and anchor that down. So let's follow this seam edge, raw edges are together, and follow this seam edge here all together, so we get that lovely curve on the bottom of his jaw and under his neck. Just keep twisting round. When you get to this next section, then just take the odd stitch on as you go around the corner. Oops. And then we're going to reverse at the end. Take your needle out of the work and take your ends off. And take our starting threads off. So we've got this bottom seam here all stitched. There's the back of the head and here's the bridge of the nose. Okay, so then what we are going to do is we're going to take our head gusset piece, we're going to open this out and we're going to just finger press this seam allowance open. We want that just to stay open for us. So just down on the end of that nose, just press that open. Because then we're going to take our gusset piece here and we are going to then, I'll show you which side I'm working with, this side, find the notch that we did earlier at that centre point, and that notch has to go directly on top of that seam that we've just sewn. And we're going to put a pin in to hold it together. And pin it so that the heads of your pin are sticking out of your work. Okay, so that's just that pin just right on there. Then what I'm going to do is follow along the head gusset and the side of the head till you get back to the flat edge, which is the neck edge, at the back of the neck edge, and we're going to match those flat edges together on the back here, just on one side to start off with, and put a pin in. And then I want you to match your raw edges all the way along around these two curved seams. And with your heads of your pin sticking out, just keep going, just make sure that all of your raw edges are together. And it's these curves when they're sewn together that make the shape of the head, and that's what makes them so cute and adorable. If you're finding value in these videos, I'd love it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel as well. I know that not everybody likes to, but it's really lovely to know that you're there and that you're watching these videos and that you find them helpful, and drop me a message or a comment if you don't mind. So we've got round the back of the head there, look, as you can see. There's our nose and here's the back of the head. And what I'm going to do now is start and work from the nose edge, and again I'm just putting those raw edges together, just taking a small bite of the fabrics with your pin so that we don't take too big a bite, because we've got to manipulate this round, and we're going to tack this seam first before we sew it. So when you come to the dint in the head, which is the sort of bit where the eye is, let's put another pin in just there. Sort of work together until those edges will sit together nice and neatly. So if I show you this again now, so we've got the side of the head here going for, there's the throat seam that we've already sewn. We matched up the notch on those opened up seam allowance on the end, and then we've pinned from the back neck edge all the way round to the eye. Now what I would suggest you do now is get some tacking thread. I've got some here. And we're just going to tack this seam in place, because it will be easier to do it after it's been tacked without having to navigate around all of those pins, and it will just keep all the fabric all nice and neat together for us. So I've got my thread double, just put a quick knot at the end just to hold that, and then I'm starting from the neck edge where we've pinned, and I'm going to do my first stitch there. I'm going to stitch about about an eighth of an inch in from the edge, because if possible we want to miss these stitches when we're actually stitching our character's head together. So if we tack an eighth of an inch from the edge and we sew a quarter of an inch from the edge, then we should be about right. And I'm going to tack this all the way round to the nose. That's about the size of my stitches, just so that you know. And as you go, you can take your pins out. Just make sure you're keeping those raw edges together, because that's the most important bit. When you get to the nose, so you can see I've tacked that all the way around, just keep your thread attached, and then I want you just to go ahead and just pin the next section. So let's go back to the back of that neck again first, so we get the end bit sorted, and then match up those raw edges and just pin that on in exactly the same way. And then once we've done that, I'm going to then carry on with my tacking stitches to tack this second half of the head onto the second side head onto the gusset, and then we'll be able to sew it round in one go. This is the theory. So once you get back down to the eye again, so when you get down to the dip where the eyes are going to go, or the top of the nose, just stop there and just come back to this nose edge here and start to make sure all your raw edges are together again, and just be pin from the nose up to the eye. I just think that's a better way than trying to lose any extra at the eye edge. So once that's all together, then I've got my needle and my thread attached for my tacking again, and I'm going to carry on with the tacking that I was doing around until I've got back round to the neck edge again at the back of the head here. Hopefully my thread's long enough, if not I'll just attach another bit. And again I'm sewing at an 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. And keeping those raw edges together will make sure that you hit all of those points for the change of direction, for the curves, to get a really good looking head. And these heads can also be hand stitched if you wanted to. I know I'm machining stitching this today, but if you feel more comfortable, especially on the smaller characters, you know, get down to the 8 and the 10-inch characters, then I have found that they are easier to hand stitch on the noses, and you get a really good result. But with something as big as the 16-inch and above, then you should, I think, be okay on some of them with machine stitching. But it's a personal choice, there's no right or wrong answer. So just do whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, so I'm just going to finish my tacking stitches, and then I'll come back to you when we're going to start and do the machining. So here we are, here's our head tacked together. And so what we need to do is we need to just sew around this now. So I'm going to put the gusset side down onto the machine bed, because then I can control the rest of the felt. And I want to control this bit here, particularly at that portion of the nose where it goes round the edge. And that is going to have the little, that's the trickiest part of it all, but we're going to do it together. And the secret will be keeping that seam allowance open and having this nose section here that's curved flat, so that we don't sew any puckers into it. And if you just check your tacking stitches to make sure you've not tacked any puckers into your stitching, into your head, and that will give you the best chance of success. So again, let's just move the head out. So put your fingers in the neck edge, and you're going to pull this neck edge flat so that you've got a nice area to be working with. And when we're doing things like this, we're working with the next inch, so just feel along with the fingers in front of the fabric and just make sure that next inch that you're going to be sewing is flat. So let's take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back to that neck edge, and then needle in the work whenever we stop. So let's now follow the raw edge around, just making sure we keep our 1/4 inch seam allowance against the back here. And I can feel under here that I've got a curve coming up, because I can feel, and if I lift it up you can see how the fabric, hopefully you can see how that's got folded underneath. So what we need to do there is we need to lift up the presser foot. We're going to pull on the bulk of the head, which is here, and just pull that bulk of that fabric back slightly, and you'll see then that that crease has been taken out. So then put your presser foot back down again, just flatten things down, and we're going to sew a bit more while we can feel it's all nice and flat. I can feel another one coming up, so needle up and just pull the fullness back on that head. Make sure everything's all nice and flat. And then let's do some more. This is all wanting to fold up, but that's okay. Up to the top of the head, just make sure we just keep moving that fabric back so that it's all nice and flat under the presser foot. That's it. And then we've got a nice straight bit just here, coming round here, nice and easy. I can see a little bit of a fold there, so let me lift up my presser foot. Let's just take some of that bulk away to make sure that everything's all lined nice and flat. Following that curve round. So coming down to the bottom of the eye here, there's quite a sharp curve down at the bottom of the eye, so I'm just going to change my direction slightly. Still make sure that everything's all right, all nice and flat, and then let's sew round this bit of the neck edge. Right, so we're coming to the end of the nose here. So we can see that because we've got the seam allowance here. So let's just lift up our presser foot and let's just have a look. So I can see by feeling and by looking that the nose gusset is flat, but we've got all of this bulk on top here. So what we want to do is just get our fingers and just pull some of that back, that bulk back, so that we can flatten where we're going to be sewing around this nose. And it's just a little bit of, sometimes you have to get used to it, but you're kind of flattening it down, because on the actual edge where you're going to be stitching, which is 1/4 of an inch in from the raw edge, there's no bulk there that's getting in the way, but by folding the fabric over itself out of the way here, it gives you that freedom to be able to go round the corners. So then let's just carry on. Going to use my awl because I want that seam allowance to stay down, and it's not at the moment, so just press it down. Nice and straight, and then I'm going to stop on the tip of the nose where that seam allowance is, lift up the presser foot again and just move some of that bulk away. Just watch your fingers underneath the presser foot to make sure you're not going to put your finger on your presser foot while you've got your fingers under, and then we're going to come round this other side as well. Again, let me just lift up that presser foot again. Just smooth that felt out, just move the bulk out of the way. And then around the back of the head here, just make sure everything's all flat. Just run your fingers over it and you'll feel if there's any creases in it. If your fabric's starting to bunch up at all. That's it. Reverse at the end. And take your needle out of the work. Let's take off those threads. So if we have a little look at our stitching now, we can see that we've got this cut this edge in just in from our tacking stitch, and it's gone all the way round. It's come down to the end of the eye, it's come round. This seam allowance has been pressed flat, and we've got this, and we've got the edge across here all nice and flat. There's no puckers in any of it, and that's all working nicely. And then we check the gusset as well, make sure that's all flat and no puckers. Do you know what, that worked really well actually. So now you can take a quick unpick, which is one of these, or a seam ripper, whatever, depends on where in the world you are as to what you call it, and we're going to remove our tacking stitches. So I have sewn over my knot, but it's come out nice and easily. And if we go down to the nose and we just take out the stitch on the nose, then once we've got an end on our tacking stitch, we should then just be able to pull those straight out. Again down here, just remove those tacking. If you have sewn through your tacking stitches, just go to one side of it and snip it off, and then go to the other side, and pull, and you'll find it'll come away easy. Try not to yank all of your gathering stitches out, because you can sometimes rip it. If you had got a pucker in any place, just go take your seam and ripper again, undo the stitches where the pucker is. Don't undo the whole thing, just where the pucker is. Go 2 or 3 stitches either side of it until your both fabrics will lay flat, and then put it back in your machine. Start a little bit before the gap in your stitches to anchor your threads, and then sew over the gap and go a few millimetres past it, and then that should reinforce that seam for you. So once you've done that, we're going to then push out with our fingers. Again, try not to overstretch that neck edge, and just reach in. Let's have a little look at how our head is looking. I do think that for me that was a much easier way of putting that head gusset in, rather than having to try and do the Y seam at the end of the nose. I feel that has gone in a lot easier. As I say, it might not work for all characters, but just have a little look. And if you can tack it in place fairly easily, then you should be fine. So again, let's get this bottom edge. So I'm just using my finger on the inside just to push out all of those seams, and just give them a roll on the edge, and that will just make sure your stitches come out to the edges. Everything's going to sit nicely. Because the next thing I think we're going to be doing is stuffing this before we start to build up the actual features. Now just on the neck edge here, can you see how that's just crinkling under the neck edge and not wanting to sit flat? What we need to do there is just, let me just take that nose out slightly, I should have said before, sorry. We're just going to put some little snips in the felt. So where we've got the little point bit where the neck is, before we change direction, put one in there, and then just snip through a few stitches. Put a few snips in, just up to, but not through the stitches. Just stay like just a hair's breadth away from the edge, from the stitches. You don't want to compromise your stitches, but you just need to really put some little snips in that seam allowance so that it will come out flatter when you turn it. And that's sitting better already. Look how smooth that is now. So grab some stuffing. Make sure your work surface clear, because you don't want to be putting any pins inside your head. I think we're finished with the sewing machine for now, I think. So you can switch your machine off, and let's get this stuffed, and then we'll get all of his features added. So I'm using this polyester polyfill fibre that I got from a local upholstery shop. If your characters are for toys, you've obviously got to be careful of any small parts on these, and the Lilly Rose dolls aren't really designed as being toys. But if you were making toys, then you can get a special CE certified safety stuffing for your characters. But this one's just, as I say, just a polyfill, similar to what you would get inside a cushion, a hollow fibre cushion. You can use that. And I'm making sure that I go right into that nose in order to get that really well stuffed. And you'd be surprised how much these heads do actually take. Well, all of the characters take actually. You do get through your stuffing quite quickly. Just keep that neck edge just poking out, just so that we can use that for sorting out the shape in it at the end. So it's coming together, look. Not sure he looks quite cow-like, but he will do when we've finished. I have every confidence in Claire's design skills. I've made enough of these dolls now to know that she's spot on with her designing. Both she and Richard. Right, okay. So let's pop those in there. And just keep stuffing this head. Do you know what? I'm really happy with the way that nose has gone in. I think doing that chin seam first, that throat seam first, has worked really well on the end of that character. I hope you agree too. I hope you found it easy. Just had to manipulate that fabric, because there's a lot of fabric here in order to fit in, but that's worked really well. Just get some more stuffing. So I've got my Byron head here all stuffed. He feels quite firm, just so that you can get an idea of how firm he feels, especially into his nose, so make sure that's all nicely stuffed. And I've also just made sure that when I look at him, he's symmetrical. He's not got a bulge on one side and not on the other, so that you can see that that all fits all together nicely. The next thing that we're going to do now is, I did say we'd finish with the sewing machine, but I don't think that we have actually, because I'm just going to sew these two pieces of fur together. So let's go and get our pieces of our head. Take our pattern off. Pattern pieces can go in our bag, and then we're going to lie these. So remember, we've got the pile going down like this. We're going to lie these together so the flat edges of that circle are together. So make sure that you've pushed all of your fur down inside. And then we're going to put a pin on the start. and then we're going to put a pin on the end. And then just put as many pins as you need to make sure you're comfortable. Just make sure all those fibres of the hair, the fibres of the hair are tucked down between the two mesh backs of that hair fabric, should I say. Okay, because then when we open this out, this is going to give us that lovely mop of hair. But we need to sew across the end here first. So let's just go to our sewing machine again. I'm going to sew this with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this time, because we've got so bulky here, I'm going to move my needle across to the left, because that will then mean that we've got the minimum amount of the presser foot onto the fur, which will make it slightly easier for sewing. So we've got to guesstimate really where your 1/4 inch seam allowance is. We're going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back just to anchor down that edge. And then we can then put our needle in our work as we start to sew. Now hold on to the ends of your threads if you've got them, because that can help you just move this fabric through. Got a pin there that needs to come out. And you can also use your awl as well, just to help move things along. If you've got a walking foot, then a walking foot would be a great thing to have on your machine at the moment. Just keep everything flat, just join that hair together. The end here, let's just tuck any fur in there just so that it's all going in the right direction. And then I'm going to reverse at the end. Press it up the needle out. Let's take our threads off. Oops. And here we've got our lovely piece of fur, and we can ruffle up the fibres on the edge there. And if you use your awl again, just going over the edge of where that stitching's been done, it will lift up those fibres in the middle and just make sure that they're all coming through the edge of the edge of your seam, so nothing's got caught in that edge there. You're not trying to pull any fibres out. You can see I've not got anything really much on my work surface, but it's just giving that little Mohican kind of look in the middle of the fur of the head. Okay, so we've got that ready. We have our ears, we have our horns, and now we just need to go into our kit to find our eyes. Here's my eyes. Now just be careful with your eyes, because from experience, they do ping off all over the place. So just take those very carefully out. And the first thing I'm going to do with each of my eyes is put a black pin through the middle of them. It doesn't matter really what colour you use, but just black because it's a black eye. And then I'm going to sit them on my machine like that. It does help just keep them in one place. I've found that over time. Because what we're going to do now is we're just going to make up this face and have a look at it in order that we can see how we work. Now, the one thing that I have found to be really helpful is if you bring up the picture. So on the front of the box we've got a drawing, but if we actually go to the website for Lilly Rose Dolls, you'll be able to pull up an actual picture of your character, whether it's Emma or Kristof or in this case Byron, and we can use that as well for a reference because we've got his nose here too. So let's just pop out all our little appendages onto one side. We've got the head, and let me get my laptop. So if you just go onto the Lilly Rose Dolls website address, and then there's a little on the page, there's a little magnifying glass. If you just put your name of your character in there, it'll bring up the options for that. And then if you come down to your pictures and click on the actual picture of your character, oops, excuse my emails coming up, then you'll see that if you then scroll across on your laptop or your device, you'll get the actual physical pictures come up. And that can be really useful for seeing how this all fits together. So therefore we've got 5 pictures of Byron that we can see. So the first one is the drawing. So the first head-on one will help us look at the ears. So with the, where's my ears gone? So we can see that the ears have got a fold inside. So we know we're going to need to fold those ears in order to get the similar shape that we've got on the character ears here. So that's something that we can bear in mind and put a few stitches in just to sort of hold that together. So we'll do that in a second. The horns as well, we can see on this picture just here, if I blow this one up, then the ears are on, but the horns sit directly above the ear, just on the edge there, and then the hair just sits over the top. So I think that what we're going to do is we're going to, let's pop our eyes in first. Let's start to give our character some personality. So let's just where the dint is before the bridge of the nose, I'm just putting the eyes in there. Just make sure they're even on both sides. And so I say the black pins do sometimes help with that character. Let's just go onto the face again. So they're just slightly, so they're not right on the seam, they're slightly below the seam. So about 1 centimetre down. This is where I say that it's easier to see on the actual character, so I can see there's a gap between the eye and the seam. Let's look at his nose. Take his pattern piece off his nose and pop that into our bag. Pop those ear pieces as well while I'm there. So his nose is upside down this way, and that sits on the edge, so the centre of the nose fits on the centre there, and then those bits there follow the edge of the seam. Let me just find some white pins to pop that on just to hold that into place. I know Claire's used some shading for her nose in the end, so we can do the same with ours. I'll probably end up, I haven't got any special kind of shading for, I tend to use eyeshadow actually, because you can get that in all different colours. So that's where we are at the moment. I just want to cover the end of that, so you can just see the end of the seam there. So I just want that to go a little bit higher so that we don't see the edge of that seam. But the points at the end do go across to the, follow along the edge of the seam there. That's better, I think. Yeah, is that looking nice and even? This is looking a little bit lower, isn't it? Let's take this bit here just down slightly. It's just about getting it even now. So we've got eyes and a nose on, so hopefully you can see that starting to come together. And I think then that starts to help with the placement of the eyes. So let's first of all tack the bottom end of these ears. Let me just get my needle threaded. Just got a hand sewing needle with some thread in it, and I've put a knot at the end. So with the ears, I've got the raw edges together, and I'm just sort of trying to see how they might go if I sew along that edge. And that seems to be fairly okay, so let's just use our needle. Let's go halfway through the middle first just to bury that. Oh, let's go from the inside as well. That'll really bury that knot for us and that raw edge. So let's just go through onto the other side. So that'll just anchor that knot down, and let's fold the ear in half. So we've got these stitched edges on the side, and then we're just going to put a few stitches over the top of each ear just to start and anchor that in. There we go. Apologies if you hear any voices. We live in an apartment over here in Spain, and so sometimes you can hear other people in their apartments, so my apologies for that, but hopefully it's not going to interrupt our stitching time, which is good. So there's our ear. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep the needle and thread on, because I'm going to have that, and I'm going to just pin it onto the back of the head. So I'm I've looked for where the height of the head is, and I'm coming just down. Let's go on to the next picture. Not that one, but the right one that I wanted, this one. So we're going a little way down from the top head seam here, and I'm just going to put a pin in just to hold that ear in place. So one from that side, I think, and then one from this side should hold that in place. Because then we can move these if we need to, but it'll just be a way of just getting used to our orientation. So there's one ear on there now. So I'm going to take a second hand sewing needle, because we might as well while we've got this here, and some thread. And I'm going to do the same with the other side to make sure that they're even first. I'm using the ears as the first bit of the face to get that lined up. So while you're having to wait for me just to do this. Should have this all organised, shouldn't I? But Blue Peter, there's a children's programme in the UK that I used to watch that was Blue Peter, and they used to say, here's one I did earlier. Okay, so let's find the middle of that ear again. It's roughly there. Go on the inside, bury that thread. Tuck those little thread edges in, and go back through to the other side, and then fold the ear in half so the seams come together. Over stitch across the top of this. So I don't have to be really neat with this because the thread's a really good matching colour, but I'm going to fluff up my fibres of my felt over the top of my character's ears and over the top of those stitches once we've done it. So I've got my needle still attached. Let's just move that ear out slightly. So the challenge is now to get these as even as possible. So I've got a needle here. So what I would suggest you do is get them on first and then adjust them afterwards. That's the easiest way, rather than trying to hold them and get them exactly right. So now I can have a look and say, oh, do you know what, we've done all right. I think that one's slightly higher. So let's just take this one just slightly lower. That's looking fairly even. So now let's get a horn. Stuffing's coming out of this one a little bit, so perhaps I've got a little bit too much in that one. Let me take that bit out. And then the horns are going to sit directly above and behind the ears. So I'm just going to mock this up first, and then I'm going to then come back and sew them on. So I'm not forgetting to sew things on. I'm just wanting to get everything placed. If you've already fine with sorting out your head, then you can just fast forward on the video if you want. I'm just sort of showing the process for people who've perhaps not done this before. So there's those bits. And then with the seam allowance here, I'm just going to finger press that open as much as I can, and then his mop of hair, here's her mop of hair, is going to sit there. So I'm imagining an imaginary line between horn to horn, for the centre seam. Can you see the centre seam is there, just here, and there's the horn, so centre seam in line with the horn. Just put a pin on to hold that on place a little bit, just while we fiddle around with things. And I think it's useful just to mock up your character like this with the face to see if there's anything you want to do, because if we'd have already set the eyes and then we decide that they're too far forward or too far back for the rest of him or her, then that would have been a shame, wouldn't it? But I think that's looking pretty good, really. That seam's going down between each of the horns, so their hair is just fluffing up as you would expect it to. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that actually. I think that's looking fairly neat and even. So let's go ahead, shall we, and let's just get this sorted. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my eyes in, I think. So let's take the hair off because we know the hair fits on nicely. So let's take the hair off to give us some room to manoeuvre. Take his toupee off. There we go. So let's do the eyes first. So for this, I'm going to use one of my doll needles, and I use these hemline ones. I think Claire has got some as haberdashery, and these are hemlines, and they've got 2 or 3. I'm going to use the medium-sized one. You do need to make sure that the eye of the needle will go through the hole on your character's eyes beads. Oops. Can't get my needle out. There we go. This as well, but you can see how nice and long it is, so you're not going to lose your needle in the middle. Just be careful of the needles that you've got holding your ears on. And the faces are worth taking some time over because they are what you will see forever, she says, if you have these dolls for a lovely long time. And it is just worth just making sure they are in the right place for the look that you're going through for your character. Right, so when I'm sewing my features on, I'm going to take a couple of stitches through first, big stitches, just through this stuffing down the bottom here, just to sort of give me a nice long tail on that knot and just to anchor it down slightly. Then I take my needle, go back in through the head, and I'm going to come out just where the pin is, holding the eye on. So then I take my pin out, pull my thread through, just make sure, I'm just going to take a little bite of the felt just there, just so that that's a little further belt and braces. So one little stitch through a few fibres of the felt, just to give it a little anchor point, and then being careful not to drop your bead, thread your bead onto your thread. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to come out, making sure you've got that thread out of the way, at the same place as the pin on the other eye. Okay, take that on out. Just make sure you don't get any loops on your threads when you're doing these, because it is easy to. And then let's thread the bead on. And I'm just going to go backwards and forwards just for a couple of stitches. So I go through the felt first. I don't ever try and really get, well, do I? You can try and go through the bead at the same time, but that can be a little bit trickier. Just slide your needle backwards and forwards until you can get to the end of your bead. No, it's not going to happen for me. So I'm coming out behind the bead. Make sure your bead's not twisted. So, and then going through the eye again, and through the felt, into the felt, and coming out again for the other side. And if you can get through in one go, then fine, go for it, but if not, don't worry, just come through. And I'm not cinching in the eyes at all, I am just going through the bead and through into the felt across to the other side. And this is why I say you've got a nice long piece of thread. You can go through 2 or 3 times just to make sure that those eyes are nicely anchored on. And black thread on black beads is hard to see sometimes. But just keep checking and making sure that you're happy that those are in the right place, and I am. That's gone through the bead, so back through the head again. Then back through the felt, and then I'm going to aim down to the back of the throat here again. And then I'm going to take some stitches through the stuffing. So quite a big stitch through the stuffing, which will anchor those threads down. And just give it a nice long end. And then when I'm ready, I can just snip that thread off. Move these pins. You don't want pins around when you've got an open neck on your character, because they can get tangled up in the stuffing and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so that's our eyes now sewn on. So now let's go on to the ears. So I'm going to take my horns off for the moment, because I know that they're going to fit on in there. That's it. And then using one of your pieces of thread at a time, I'm just going to take, so I do tuck the raw edges of the ears in underneath the ear, and I'm sort of got my finger inside the centre of the ear to sort of flatten it down, and then I'm going to take a little stitch out of the head, and then a little stitch just above the seam where we sewed the bottom of the ear together, then a little stitch out of the head, and a little stitch out of the ear. I don't try and go through both the head and the ear at the same time, because I think that's a little too tricky. And the stitches are fairly small, but they might not be invisible at this stage, but don't worry. So that's how mine's looking at the moment. So I have a couple of stitches on the front here just to hold these front edges down. Let's move down to this side here. So again, through the ear, this side. And I'm sort of still got my finger in the ear, but I'm just sort of moving the ear over to the other side. Hopefully you can see. And taking a stitch out of the ear along the seam where we sewed the ear together to hold it, and then down along this side here. Oops, caught on his nose. and then one through the ear again. And you just kind of go in doing a circle around the head, just catching this ear in place. Back round to the back again. And because we know that the horn's going to be attached at the back up here, I'm actually going to move the end of my casting off to be in a little bit higher up where that horn is, so that we can lose that behind the back of the horn. So I'm going to leave my needle on my thread at the moment because we've got that ear on. That's how that's all looking at the moment for you to see. Let me go and do the other one. So onto the other piece of thread and needle, and let's do the same. So in this case, starting off with the head, then through the ear, then through the head again. And you can just dint your felt with your thumb, just so that you can get your needle in and out. So I'm through the head, so let's go through the ear. That's pretty fine. And you can also go round, so here, so I've got to go stitch across. I'm going to indent down on my head, and it'll allow me to take a little stitch out of the head. So if you indent down on the felt, it just does allow you to take that, get that stitch. And then when you're ready, you can take your pin out. Just make sure you don't lose your placement, or your ear starts going skew if you want it to be going the right direction so that they look even. I'm just taking those stitches on the ear just above the you know, those stitches we put in just to hold the ear in half. By just putting your stitches in above that, it sort of gives it a little bit of a base for the ear to hold on to. And just remember, before you cast your threads off, just have a quick check to make sure that you're happy with your ear placement. Let's have another look. See if we're even. Oh, is this one a little bit lower now? No, I think it's going to be okay. I think it's fine. Just check as well, just to make sure before you start casting off. So again, I'm going to come up to the top of this one again so that we're ready to sew the ear on, and we can use the same colour thread to sew the ear on. So we've got, sorry, not the ear, horn I meant. So there's the ears on. So let's go back to our horns now. Make sure that I'm going to stuff push the stuff in right in, because we can soon manipulate it back out again. And the horn wants the seam to be up to the top, so that's the right way round, and I've got it just resting on the back of the ear of the character head. So let me just show you, oops, like that. So it's just resting on the back of the character ear. I'm just going to take some stitches through the felt and through the ear and through the head. And we can tuck the edges of the horn in as we go round, should we wish. How are you feeling about your character? Hope you're pleased with it. Hope you feel like you can feel the personality of the character starting to come through as well, because that's always fun, isn't it, as they start to come alive under your needle and thread. So I'm just going to go around again and just make sure that one's sewn on like that, and then I'm going to do exactly the same with the other ear and just make sure that that's all in place and where I want it to sit. And I'm going to cast off my thread, and then we'll come back and we'll decide whether we're doing I might do the nose next. I've got a loop in my thread there. If you do get a loop, just separate your two pieces of thread, one from the other. My thread's double at the moment, and then pull on one and then pull on the other, and then it should pull that little loop out for you. That's it. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and just stitch these down and make sure that this is all nice and neat, and do the other one, and then I'll be able to come back to you and we'll get a bit more done. Okay, so here's my head at the moment. You can see the horns and you can see the ears. and then I can see the nose going on here and the eyes going on there. So I want to do the nose next. I'm going to just take out the pins for his nose because I can see that their little seam is just getting in the way of his nose sitting nicely. So I'm going to use a trick that Jane Sweetman, one of my followers and subscribers, told me about when I met her at the workshop that I did with Lilly Rose Dolls, with Claire of Lilly Rose Dolls, and she said that if you take a pin, I've got a broken felting needle here, but you just need like a pin with a blunt end really, and if you scuff over from one side of the seam to the other, so you're pulling up the fibres of the felt and pulling them up to cover over the seam, so you go one way first. You're just scraping up those, yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. You're scraping up the fibres of the seam. So go up first and then come back the other way and go down the other way. And this is something you can do anywhere. So if your facial seams aren't quite straight, this is another great tip because it will hide these seams that you've made. So scuff those up, just keep going backwards and forwards over there until you've scuffed. You're not trying to scuff to make a hole, so do be careful there. I'm just going to scuff down here as well. We're just ruffling up the fibres, scraping up those fibres a little bit so it makes them a little bit proud and just makes it a little bit fluffier. And hopefully you can see on the end how those fibres are ruffling up. Just go as far as you want to. I'll just do this bit just for showing you, but I probably will end up going across here into the head as well. Just make sure you've got as many as you want, sort of ruffling up. So see how his nose is all fluffy now. Just let me get my iron, hold on 1 second. For my iron to warm up. Now you just bear in mind you can't do this if you've got polyester felt, so I don't know where in the world you are and what felt supplies you have, because your felt will melt. So you can only do this where you've got a wool content to your felt, but you've got you need the iron and you need to have some water in it, so you've got some steam. Let me get my steams on and let me just turn up so that we've got a nice amount of steam. There we go, I can hear it coming out. And then you're just going to touch the steam and the edge bottom of the iron to the felt. Just gently, watch your fingers because the steam will burn you. You're just going to iron those fibres down. Just all in different directions, just keep ruffling them all up. Because then hopefully if I show you, can you see how that nose seam's pretty much disappeared? It's a little bit of magic. And just do it as much or as little as you need. Just be careful, I say, of your hands and make sure that that's looking all good. I'll just put the iron out of the way for a second, because then I can take his nose now, and I've deliberately left a little bit of the line down here and the lines there because I want those for references. So the point at the bottom here of those two bits goes right on the edge. Oops. Come on, Byron. So I can pop a pin in to hold that, and that will then pivot. So now I can look at him and see how I want this to go, to be able to put the little upturn bits on his nose in place. And I've not got that seam now, just sending my eye off. And then you're just sort of holding on to that just to see if you can get the mouth just to sit where you want it to sit. Now I know that Claire glues these on. I'm going to have a go at just putting some stitches through it. So I've got some nice white thread. Choose that colour, yeah, you want a colour that's not going to show. And I'm going to hand stitch this. I've got my hand sewing needle with a knot at the end. And first of all, let's just lift up one of these edges and just secure the knot down with a couple of stitches underneath the nose here. And that will just secure our end in there. And putting the nose back in place, I'm going to come out through the felt on the white, so that now I can get this back to where I want it to go. Okay, so let's have that just there. So what I'm going to do now is with my stitches, I'm going to try and do a little stitch that goes from the nose into the rust, so over the edge of this white felt, across at a right angle to the edge of the felt, and then I'm going to then use my finger to indent the felt to come up about 1/8 of an inch along, and I'm just doing a little stitch just further along. And I think that by ruffling up these fibres the same way as we have done on the nose, and then using the steam and the heat of the iron to press that down again, I think that that will hide these stitches once we've finished. So I'll try it and then you can see. And if you don't like doing this small stitching, then you can always just glue it on as well, because I know that Claire does use a fabric glue to then glue hers on, or you can use a glue gun. Just be careful of not getting any extra glue anywhere onto the rest of your head, because that would be a shame at this stage. Take your pins out as you go. So I'm actually travelling along at an angle behind the felt. So my stitches are coming across at right angles to the felt. So I'm travelling across behind the white of the nose. Make sure you don't get any loops on your thread. Try and keep your stitches consistent if you can. Before I do the other one, I just want to match up as fast as I can. Keep the symmetry on the nose if you can. And just make sure to leave a long tail at the end of the nose as well. Just put a bit of pressure on that and you'll pull that off. So that's how the nose is looking. But like I said before, what we can do then is use our little pin trick again. Just being really careful, because you don't have as many fibres to play with as you do on the front of the nose, of the front of the head. But just fluff up those fibres and it will just soften the edges of those stitches for you. I do find this trick is just so helpful. I'm kind of pulling up towards the stitches, or down from the middle over the stitches rather than up from the edge. Bit of steam when it comes on. There it goes. I'm just touching those fibres down. Just make sure the bottom of the iron's clean for when you're doing the nose. That's that. And then the last thing that we'll go, well, the first thing I think I'm going to do, shall we do that? Yeah, let's do around the neck first, and then we'll do the hair on. Yeah, let's do around the neck. So we're going to take some thread, nice long piece of thread. I'm going to have it double. On our hand sewing needle. It doesn't need to be a doll needle, this can just be the ordinary needle. And if your thread keeps breaking on you, you can always do a quadruple length thread if you wanted to, and just put the folded edge through the eye of the needle, and that will make your threads quadruple. I'm going to start at the back. Well, let's start on the seam, because that's quite a good place to start. So let's start on this back seam, and then I'm going to do one stitch that just sort of straddles across that seam to anchor or maybe two stitches, and then that's just anchored that thread into that seam where there's plenty of felt to hold on to. And then I'm just going to go around the neck, and I'm just doing a little running stitch. So just like that. You see the needle? That's it. And this is around the neck edge, because we've finished really sewing on what we need to. The hair we can sew, we don't need to go from the inside. It was really only the eyes that we needed to go from the inside, and you can do this bit sooner if you needed to, just to secure everything, all that stuffing inside. Just depends on whether your stuffing was behaving for you, and mine was, so that's why it sort of didn't come to mind straight away. Through that seam allowance at the centre front, and then round the other side. And I'm not pulling it in yet, wait until the end, so just get your running stitches going round first. Don't have to be tiny, but try not to make them 1/2 inch long either. Now let's go just slightly past. I find it better to go just slightly past where you started, just by 1 stitch or 2. And then tuck your stuffing in, and then just pull on those gathering stitches, and you want a smallish kind of hole in the centre here. You don't want to break your threads, so just be careful with that. But once you've sort of got it tightened in like that, then hold on to your threads in one place with your finger and thumb, and just go through some of the gathers that you've made, and don't let go of your thread here until you're right close, and then quickly just let go. And that should just put a little back stitch in there just to hold those fibres, those threads for you. And then I tend to do a little back stitch all the way on top of these, as if I can, just to hold them all together. So that's what it's looking like. And this is going to give us a nice neck edge to be able to attach onto our body. So there is a separate video of how, and the other reason why I'm not put my hair on is because I'm using the top of this, and it would mess up all of that hair, wouldn't it, if that was on already? So perhaps it is a good idea to do the bottom of it here before you put your hair on. Just make sure that's all cinching in, and then when I've got some stitches around, I just sort of go across to the different sides and sort of crisscross across that centre void, and that then sort of helps to keep it into place as well. So just 1/4 inch seam allowance really that you're using, and you want a circular hole. This is going a little bit oval shape because of the shape of the head, so just try and keep it fairly circle shaped if you can. And there is a video on my channel for how to sew your character all together. Once you've done that, there's a generic one definitely, or you can pop onto the video about Harvey if you wanted to, and see that video, because Clara, it's all the same, the way that you sew the characters once you've got all the body parts together. And I will just show you at the end about sewing the tail on, because Harvey and Clara don't have a tail. A little bit of stuffing just sticking out, but I'm not worried about that because you won't see it when it all comes together. So a few stitches in place at the same place in order just to sort of anchor this thread down. We don't want it to come undone on our character. Then I'm going to leave a long tail. So again, needle in your character. Make sure you can see where the needle's coming out before you let go. And then you can pull on it, and then that'll give you a nice long end to your thread. The reason why I like a nice long end on the thread is because if we cut that thread close to here, it could unravel easily, whereas having that about 1 inch length of thread inside, it's very unlikely that this is going to actually unravel. I'm just going to take off some of these threads that we've got from the stuffing. You don't really need to, but it's going to make it look a bit neater. And now let's get our hair on, shall we? And then we'll colour the nose, and then we're done. The other thing that I'm going to do as well is round the back here, I'm going to fluff up the fibres of the felt so that it hides the stitches the same way we've done before. And that will then hide the stitches attaching those horns on and make it look a little bit more organic. Do the same with the ears to soften the edge of the ears if you want to as well. And if you've got a bit where, remember we pushed the felt up inside those horns, what you can do is take a decent size needle, and you can just push it inside and then just manipulate that stuffing back down again so that it fills up to the end of those horns. can just manipulate it down. So, and it'll just mean that they don't get too floppy on you. That's it. Okay, let's sew the hair on. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is open up the seam allowance on the hair. Choose which bit you want to go forward and back. The hair might just sit slightly better one way or the other. You can just decide which way. I think I'm going to have mine that way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is open up that seam allowance and then pop it on the head, and you're going across the top of the head from ear to ear, and you want to make sure that as far as possible, oops, your hair is even. Now what I'm going to do is take a pin, or a couple of pins. I'm just going to pin the hair down for now. So I'm going through the seam allowance only, and I'm just going from ear to ear where the horns are, and I'm just popping that seam allowance down onto the head, because I just want to check that's going far enough forward. Perhaps not. I think I need to be a little bit further forward than that. So again, we're just checking this hair to make sure that it's where we want it to be. So I'm still going in line with the ears and horns across the top of the head, but I've just moved it forward slightly. Just push that pin in so that's not stopping it. That's better. Right, okay, I'm happier with that. Am I happy with the sides as well? Yeah. So then I'm going to fold this back, leave my pins in place, and just run a row of stitches forward and back across this hair first, in order sort of to hold it in place where it needs to be. So let's go through the hair first on the seam allowance only, just anchor that thread, and then through the head and through the hair. These don't need to be neat stitches because you're not going to see them, but I'm just going through the head and then through the mesh on the back of the fur. And this is just going to anchor that fur down so it doesn't move then when we are sewing our hair on in the end, finally. So a bit of belt and braces really. I suppose if you go all the way around the outside, then it's not going to come off, is it, the fur, but it's just helping you with that placement so it doesn't move too much when you are actually stitching it down finally. Where's my needle on? There it is. So let's just check that again. So you can see that fur just sticks still on the top there just by hand. Yep, that's going to be fine. Okay. So now, whoops, caught around the ears. I'm just going to go around onto the other side of the hair and just attach the other seam allowance down as well, so that that's truly belt and braces, just holding that all down. And it helps the fur just stick to this, kind of keep to the same shape as the head as well. As I say, these are quite big stitches, but it's just holding it in place, just so that we can work with it a bit easier. You can lose your pins in all of this fur, you see. Oops. Come here, Byron. Right. So just do a double stitch on that edge. Okay. So his hair can go back down again now, or her hair, whichever. And then what we're going to do now is going to lift those fibres out of the way, and we're just going to make sure that we've got some stitches down at the end of the seam allowance, just holding that hair down there. And then we're going to start to move the hair out of the way to expose the edge of the fur mesh really. And then I'm going to come up just on the edge inside the fur, and then come down into the felt. So I'm trying not to take too big a stitch out of the felt that's visible, but I'm catching down the edge of the fur. So I'll put a needle through and I'll show you 1 second. So like that. Because this edge of this fur can fray slightly. You see how I'm holding the fibres of the hair out of the way, so it exposes that mesh edge. And then I can pull the needle through. And because we've got those stitches across the top here, the hair is pretty much staying in the right place. And we're just matching the hair now to the contours of the head. Ooh, careful for your ears. And we can go into the mesh at the back because the fur will hide our stitches. And then just tipping the fur back again as I move round in order to expose that edge. So that's how it's looking at the moment when it's all fluffed up, look. Some fibres caught there of hair, but so I'm going to go all the way round doing this, just catching it down to the forehead. Remember to leave a long thread on your end, long end on your thread when you finish off, just as we always do. And then we'll come back when it's time just to style our character's hair. So that's just going along like that, because then when we come back and style this hair and pull this down, you're not going to see those stitches because the fluff of the hair will cover all of those stitches and make it look really nice and really smart. Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute when I've finished. Okay, so I've just finished his hair. See, it's all just sticking up. So I'm just going to I'll use my awl and just kind of use that just to fold it down. For some reason, the awl seems to work a little bit better than your finger, and you don't get any oils from your fingers onto the hair as well. It doesn't pull any bits out, but it just seems to make it ruckle up nicely. And again, round the back, you can see how it all sticks up after you've been sewing it. Just pulls those fibres down, as I say, without getting the oils from your hands. Get a little bit out, but that's not too much. And then just to keep that character, and around your ears as well and your horns, it hides all those stitches all beautifully. Just make sure that hair's sticking there nicely, and just make sure that you've still got your shape in your hair, that you've not got it kind of not gone too flat, or she's not gone too flat with you pushing on your work surface to get everything in. The last thing then is some shading. Now to do this, I've brought up the picture. Oops, let me bring it closer for you. Brought up the picture on the Lilly Rose Dolls site so that we can have a look. And I think that's about as big as I can get that. So we can see that we've got some shading around here and around here in grey. These little bits here are a little bit pinkier, and then we've got some grey here that just goes onto the mouth slightly. And again, in the instructions it sort of shows you where to shade. So what I've got is I've got some eyeshadow. So I've got a little bit of you're better off with a matte, but this has got a little bit of a shimmer to it, but it's certainly a mid brown. And then I've also got this set, which I got free. It's not colours I necessarily wear, but there's a nice dark grey in there as well as that peachy kind of rusty colour. So these are the colours that I'm going to have a little play with and see if we can get some colouring onto ours. And I've got a little brush. The thing to remember with this is that less is more. So you need to try and do just a little bit if you can do. So I'm going to start off with this little bit of this mid-brown first, and I'm going to go into the nostrils just here. So just put a little bit onto the nostrils just there, just to start and colour that in. I'll just give a little bit of a foundation for it. So that's how that's just starting off. It's already looking 3D, isn't it, as soon as you start to add some of this on. Claire's very clever, isn't she, thinking about all of this and how to add this dimension. So I'm hoping we're not going to be left with a shimmer. I just want to get the shading and just sort of start it off so I can see how that's going. But you can see how that is just starting to take that 3D shape. So we need some on the bottom of the lip here as well. So let's get a little bit more on the brush, and just don't get too much on to start off with, because you can always add more on, but once we've coloured this felt, it'll be difficult to get it off again. It's got some on the bottom there. So yeah, that's starting to look nice. So I'm going to get a little bit of my darker one, but I'm just going to be careful because I don't want to have too much of that. And I'm just going to go over the top of where I've put some of that brown. And I'm no artist, so if I can do this, anybody can do this. And just put it in the bottom of the mouth there. I think it's just going underneath that nose, just in here as well, because I think that's where she sort of has got it, so it couldn't look indented a bit like a mouth. How's that? Oh yeah, that's looking okay. That's looking well. Let's put just a little bit just on the edges just here of the darker. Literally just a little bit. Okay, happy with that. There's nothing on this bit here, and then I'm just going to brush it off on the back of my hand, just to get those colours off. And then I'm going to get a little bit of this peachy brown colour, just a little bit, and we're just going to put it on the edges just here. Again, just trying to go for those matte colours, not for a sheen. Don't want him to look too sparkly and disco, do we? But just to colour those edges in. How's that looking? I think that's looking pretty good. And that's all just been done with that eyeshadowy makeup, just to give that 3D effect. Okay, let me just put the lid back on these, and then I'm going to finish off showing you the head, because that's what we were finishing off, but I'm going to put my character together now, and then I can show you the completed character as well. And what I might well do is, remember how we did that fading of the seams around the nose? I think I'm going to carry that on up my face and down my chin, that's just in the same way that they have done, and around my ears and around the horns, just to hide those stitch marks. I do think it really adds a lovely dimension onto it. But for now, that is our head. Really hope you're enjoying the video, and I hope that you've enjoyed stitching along with me. Before we finish off, if you fancy subscribing to my channel, I'd be really grateful. I do like to know that people are there. It is a little bit of ego as well, just to see how many people we've got following, but you know, I put a lot of time and effort into the videos to help everybody, and it's a nice way to show your appreciation, and it's very, very much appreciated. I do appreciate all of you. Okay, on behalf of Byron or Emma or Kristof and myself, I'm going to go and put him together so that I can do you a final show of him when she's all finished. Okay, see you in a minute. Okay, so we're a little bit later on, and I've attached my head to my body. I've attached the arms and the legs. You'll notice one difference with the way I attach my legs and arms, and that is that I use a button. Can either be one that's the same as your felt colour, or a contrast. I've just got a stash of buttons and just use those. You won't see those because they'll be under the clothes once it's finished, but it does give something for the thread to hold on to, because sometimes if the thread is stronger than the felt, then sometimes if the characters are going to be dressed a lot, or are going to be pulled by children, sometimes those stitches could come through. I know that Claire doesn't put buttons on hers. It's just a feature that I particularly like on mine. It does add a degree of complexity to get your needle to go through your buttons each time, but I'll have explained that in the video where you put them together. So if you want to go and have a look at that one, if you've not already, then that might be worth looking at. So we've got our character, and it does stand up, which is great as we want, but the last thing that we need to do now is we need to attach our tail. So we've got our tail that we made earlier, and then I'm just going to use a pin and just sort of locate where I want that tail to go for now. I think that looks about right. And then all I've got then is a hand sewing needle with a knot on the end. I'm going to poke the needle down inside the tail to start off with, just to anchor that thread, if I get my needle the right way around. So anchor that. Poke that down inside the tail just to anchor that thread, and that just means the knot just tucks inside. And then I'm going to take some little stitches to just hold this tail in place. So the pin will just hold it for a second or two, just until we can get a few stitches in there. So through the tail now, and then through the body, close to the base of the tail. And I've just matched it onto this centre back seam, just in order that that all stays together. It just keeps the symmetry looking right on the character. So I can take that pin out now because that tail is attached. We just need a few more stitches just to finish it off a little more. And I could have waited until the trousers were finished, and only time will tell whether I should have waited till the trousers were finished in order to have the tail poking out, but I can always move it if I need to. And I just wanted for completeness just to show you how to sew the tail on. So I'm just pushing down on the felt at the back, and that gives me an indentation so that my needle can go up and down. I'm just doing a few stitches in place here just in order to attach the tail on, and then I will use that technique that we've used before to just fluff up the felt around those stitches, and they will then disappear into the fluff. Okay, so I've got quite a few stitches going through there now, so I'm going to put the needle in, come along a little way through the body, make sure you can see where the needle's coming out before you then let go of it, especially if you've only got a single thread on it, and then just put some pressure on the thread, snip close to the bottom, and then that will push the thread back inside for you. And there we go, one tail all nicely attached. So let me just turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup. So here we are. Here is our Highland Cow, complete with all mop of lovely fluffy hair on there. I hope you've enjoyed sewing your own Highland Cow with me as well. So whether this is Emma with her dress and her jacket, or it's Kristof, who's 14 inches, slightly smaller than this character is, or whether it's the same as this one, which is Byron. I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me today. We've got the lovely tail on the back there, all the arms are on there, and the legs, horns and the ears, everything's just looking fabulous and ready for the clothes. So thanks again to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls for gifting me the kit so that I can bring this video to you. I hope you have enjoyed sewing along with me today, and if you have, I'd love it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, if that's okay, because it does make it all worthwhile if I know there's people out there watching and looking forward to getting my videos. And you can also click on the notification bell, and if you do that, then you'll be notified by YouTube if I upload another video, and that just makes sure you don't miss anything. So yeah, on behalf of my Highland Cow, Byron and I, then we're going to say goodbye for now, and the next thing that I'll be back with, I think I'm going to do trousers first. So we're going to do the trousers first, then the waistcoat, then the jacket, and our Byron will be all fully dressed. Okay, I'll see you soon. Take care everybody, happy stitching, bye.